And we're back to the normal grind of things this time.
It's been a couple weeks, right, for Cybersecurity Awareness Month. With October, we shifted it up a little bit, right?
Yeah.
A lot of things happened. Not to say that we weren't keeping an eye on the news, but back to your regularly scheduled programming.
Back to the regularly scheduled programming. Now, you may notice that I have a thing on my nose, and that's because that's what's keeping me breathing right now. Because something has irritated the inside of my nose, and it's super swollen. So I need this thing to be able to breathe without sounding like a jet engine for right now. But thank you so much for joining us for GPS Live for the first week of November 2023. We're coming hot off the heels of Cybersecurity Awareness Month in October, where we did some really awesome streams and content with experts from across various different practices in cybersecurity, getting their thoughts on like the future of where things are heading in their regions. We talked to let's see here. We talked to Ray about the future of just AI in general and kind of securing AI models and thoughts that go into that. We talked to Rick about the escalating cyber warfare tactics and kind of reaching that mutually assured destruction point in cybersecurity warfare. We talked to George about IoT and its emergence like into our personal lives, right? Like literally how it's affecting us in our bodies, the ways that we're adding biometric scanning and things like that. And how to keep that secure. And then finally, we talked to Tony, and that was very much into IoT as a system and industrial appliances and its security and how we secure things moving forward. But we are returning now to talking about what's happening today, not in the future, but right now, or at least over the last week.
But before we do have something important to run by everybody. As usual, the views and opinions expressed by the host of this live stream are their own and not necessarily reflect the official opinions of GuidePoint Security.
Yeah, it's our own thing. We say these things. Not anyone else. It's just us. It's not the official company.
That's okay. Now we got that out of the way.
Now that is out of the way, we do have some interesting stories to jump into. If you are watching live with us right now, then let us know where you're coming in from, right? Like where are you watching from? What's going on in your world, and please use the comments to converse with us. We enjoy reading your comments and bringing those up. But we have some interesting stories to cover this week. Specifically, we've got some stuff about some agreements internationally. We've got some new cybersecurity industry news for the ways that we evaluate threats, and then we've got some attacks and some bug bounties. So why don't we kick it off, Jonathan, with the first one, the Forum of Incident Response and Security teams, and what they
call it what the rest of us call it. We call it FIRST, right?
We call it FIRST. We all call it FIRST. Everyone does.
I have no idea what it stood for, but today, FIRST, the Forum of Incident Response and Security teams, as you said, right? Also better known as the organization that publishes something called the CVSS. This is something that we have actually used in the kind of security field for a long time, also known as the Common Vulnerability Scoring System. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, why have I heard of something like the CVSS? This is how we rank, right? It's based on stuff like exploitability, impact of confidentiality, integrity, availability, the CIA triad, requiring privileges, higher scores. The idea is the more points, the more worse. And this is how we say low, medium, high, and critical in a number of different vulnerabilities that we're dealing with across the internet. So that should hopefully remind our viewers why CVSS is not just kind of important, but it's something that we deal with on a daily basis, right?
Yeah, it's the common language. I think this is something that we've heard a lot about across the industry for a while. Like CVSS has been around for what was it? I think you said
18 years.
Yeah, 18 years. Doing this good work and getting us all on the same page. And this is something that a lot of organizations, a lot of companies have tried to branch out into, is right, creating common frameworks and languages that we can all use. You've got stuff like MITRE ATT&CK, right? You've got these different ways to talk about something, to say like, hey, we all can understand this. If we all learn this and know how to talk about a thing in this way, then we'll be better at communicating about threats within the industry, and the things that we are facing. And so with CVSS 4.0, they are making some, I think, needed and welcome changes to the way that things are scored. So they've added a few new metrics to CVSS scoring. So you've now got things that are included in a vulnerability assessment for anything that is given a CVSS score. Is like, is it automatable? Is it like a wormable vulnerability? Right? Is this something that you can just hit play and it goes and it'll keep going forever into other systems?
Yeah.
Recovery, right? How resilient is this vulnerability, right? Is it something that can keep cropping back up over and over? At least that's my understanding of what I'm reading right now. It's value density and vulnerability response effort, right? So how valuable is this vulnerability and what it's going to be impacting, and then also how much effort does it take for an organization to respond to this? Right? Is this a simple like toggle that you can be like, yeah, turn that setting off, or is it something that you're gonna have to go much deeper on? And then finally, provider urgency. So how quickly do you have to get around to this based on what they're seeing within that vulnerability? And those are some really welcome changes, I think, because that's something, even looking at scores in the past that I've taken a look at and dove into, I've been like, yeah, this like seems really, really bad, but is it only affecting like this very small sliver of the population?
Yeah, and that's where CVSS kind of is only like a foundational component in most broader calculations of risk overall, right? Is it a dev system or is it a production system?
Right.
Is it public facing? Is it internal facing? And taking it into account, some of this new stuff, along with the fact that there's additional applicability, right? It now applies to stuff in our OT, ICS, and IoT worlds. Right. Considering stuff like safety metrics that can be, from the approach of like environmental, right? Does this apply only to maybe a SCADA network? And right. These controls are often found in some kind of maybe water utility, versus this vulnerability is in a kiosk that is isolated for checking in guests, right? Although it does still have its own importance, can this cause some kind of detrimental or catastrophic environmental effect? And so I personally think that all of these new updates are absolutely welcomed when it comes to the CVSS scoring. And still to remind everybody, as I said, CVSS is only one part of the picture. All of you CISSPs out there should know that risk is a massive calculation of multiple things, not just the fact that I personally am a 9.8 on the CVSS scale, so watch out. But if you keep me, locked up in the server closet room, then I am not as dangerous.
Right. And I think the final change that's important to note here is that they're really trying to educate and educate people on the idea and push the idea that the CVSS score is not just the base score of a vulnerability, right? Like, it's not just like, oh, this is a 9.7 and it's done. Which would be pretty terrible. It is, but they've also added new nomenclature for just like the base score, and then base plus threat, which is CVSS BT, and then they have base plus environmental, and then they have base threat environmental. So these are 4 new scoring metrics, I think, right? So your base threat, your base environmental, and base threat environmental. With those 4 scoring metrics, you can look across these different scores to see like, okay, what's just the base score of this vulnerability? Yeah, that's pretty bad. But like once you add in environmental factors, once you add in threat factors from this particular vulnerability, it actually is a much higher thing, and that's something that we need to pay more attention to. So like we've said a couple times, I think some very welcome and very needed changes in CVSS scoring.
So all of you that are watching online right now, and also the ones in the future, we'd love to hear your comments. What are your favorite CVSS scores that you see out there, and the vulnerabilities that you have to deal with on a daily basis? Let us know, because you'd be surprised. You're probably not the only one dealing with them.
Can we take a second to reflect on your wording of your favorite CVSS scores, right? Welcome to Mondo Video's top 10
Yeah.
CVSS scores.
But yeah, so there will be some feedback from the community, right, regarding around is this type of thing even the appropriate way to handle putting a risk applied to some kind of vulnerability? How accurate is this information? And oftentimes we do see that CVSS scores change over time for particular vulnerabilities as more information comes out from a developer or a vendor regarding their products and tools. And so something may start out as a low and then work its way to a medium, then work its way to a high. Or don't forget, just because it's low doesn't mean it may affect you. Chaining together multiple lows can still lead to a compromise. So.
Yep. Yeah, it's those low level threats that we tend to ignore that end up being the ones that can bite us in the end. So, but speaking of ignoring threats, we'll move on to our next story here, which is that a group of 40 countries in a U.S. led coalition are vowing to not pay ransom to cyber criminals. So 40 groups or 40 countries have gotten together in one group to kind of sign on to this international pact, the International Counter Ransomware Initiative. Is in response to the dramatic rise and increase that we've seen in ransomware attacks throughout the world, and particularly in the U.S., where we've been hit with, according to the article that is on Reuters, where we're pulling this from, 46% of attacks for ransomware attacks happening in the U.S., which is also backed up, I would say, by the Guy Point Research and Intelligence Team reporting that we see. The majority of attacks that are tracked in that report all happen within the U.S. So 40 countries have gotten together to promise that they will never pinky promise that they never ever will pay ransom to ransomware actors.
Pinky promise. Yeah, no, this is actually kind of a big deal, right? And so one of the quotes particularly that I want to pull out of the article, coming from Ann Neuberger, who's the Deputy National Security Advisor for the current administration, is as long as there's money flowing to ransomware criminals, this is a problem that will continue to grow. And this is something that's often said, also by the United States FBI, which advises against paying ransomware criminals simply because this incentivizes them to continue their malicious operations. If it works, then why quit? Now, obviously, getting arrested is something that we also see in the news, and it generates its own series of challenges for some of these criminals. But by simply saying, look, we are not going to participate in following up on these ransom demands. We are not going to cater to all of these extortions that are trying to be made. The hope is that a lot of this stuff falls off. Now, there is a lot more to it than just saying I'm not going to pay, right? You mentioned that there were some particular angles that are going to be used by this group of 40 or so countries. Yeah. What was it? It was information sharing and also some AI stuff, right?
Yeah. So what all the countries have promised to do is that they are going to be sharing basically a blacklist of digital wallet addresses with the U.S. Department of Treasury, so that we can track those wallets and we can make sure that no payments are going to those. Like these are just blacklisted internationally wallets now. But also they plan to use some AI. It's light on details, but there will be some use of artificial intelligence to analyze blockchains and try to identify illicit movement of funds right across the blockchain. So being able to, without even potentially ever having one of these countries or been told to pay to one of these wallets, being able to identify activity and say, hey, that's probably a wallet linked to cyber criminal activity, and so we're going to blacklist that wallet. Now, how this comes into effect, right? Like what the actual outcome of this is going to be, I'm kind of curious what the practical application is.
Yeah, I mean, to start out, we're already seeing a lot of researchers taking part in identifying wallets that are used by cyber criminals and kind of monitoring the transactions in and out of those.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, it can still be difficult. Although crypto is not a perfect system, it is still one of the more challenging ways of following the money.
Right.
But applying some more insight into how money's coming in and out of maybe some exchanges might help lead to finding who's ultimately cashing out on this. Eventually, you have to remember you can't just take Bitcoin and do everything in the world with it. Although that was kind of what they set out to do as a
Mm-hmm.
hope, and we're still not there yet. And so it still must be converted to a local currency at some point along the way. And
Right.
so applying some kind of insight into watching some of these transactions at scale, being able to identify when money is ultimately landing in the hands of a criminal and not just a cryptocurrency, but a local currency, a fiat currency, is going to be at play. And uh, look, we all know that ransomware is kind of at an all-time high right now that we're, companies across the United States and the world are absolutely dealing with. In fact, we'll kind of lead into that on our next story coming up. But this is something that we've been talking about and hearing about for a while, at least here in the United States, regarding either criminalizing the payment of crypto for a ransom, or the other one is, how do you deal with if a business was willing to take that risk and make a payment, or as a part of I don't know, maybe like a decision in conjunction with a cyber insurance firm. Um, Again, I don't think it's going to magically stop the payments, but I think we're going to start seeing more um, support around saying no to these
Right.
organizations. And I don't know where that's going to lead. We're still dealing with now double extortion these days. Something, I don't know. Let's hear from you, our viewers, in the comments.
Yeah.
Let us know below.
Yeah, like I said, it will be interesting to watch the practical application of this. Is this going to be something that is used to broadly apply to private companies? Does this only apply to um, governmental entities, things like that? So it'll be interesting to see how that applies, and we would love to hear from our viewers about what they think will be happening with this. So speaking of governmental entities and cyber attacks and ransomware, though, you found a couple really interesting stories that were related together. In fact, you found all the stories this week. Who am I kidding? Um, but you found a couple really interesting stories that are linked together by the common thread of victim.
Yeah. So to kick off our next part of our segment here is, why are we still attacking libraries with cyber attacks? Now, two major library systems on an international scale have been hit. First one I'll talk to is the Toronto Public Library System. They've been hit with the Black Basta ransomware attack. They have come out and claimed it, so this is a known group. Sadly, this library system, like many other library systems, are used by the public and they're for good. This is one of those things that you shouldn't be going after. Hospitals, right. Libraries, schools, right? This isn't this. Sorry, but public sector doesn't have a whole lot of money to throw around all the time.
Right.
And so this is Canada's largest public library system. They have about 12 million books under their system, with over 100 branches across the city. And they're dealing with a massive technical outage across not just its website, but a number of its online services. Stuff like being able to access your account, being able to use their check-in and checkout system on their website, and also some of their digital collection services. It's really tough. They're not the only ones, right? Across the pond, which I was making note of this earlier, the late Queen Elizabeth II's other territory over in, the British Library has also been hit by a major IT outage. But they're not saying it's ransomware, right?
They have not come out and said what kind of attack it is yet. They just have claimed that they have been hit by a cyber attack and it's taken most of their systems offline. But they have not claimed or said that it is ransomware specifically. But I think the interesting thing about both of these, right, especially the one in the UK, right, it's taken out their phone lines, on-site library services. So like whereas in the Toronto attack, right, some of the interesting details about that one are that their main critical servers with sensitive data were not encrypted. So that indicates that potentially there wasn't like widespread access to their systems. Anyone who is still logged into their accounts, Office 365 accounts, any workers and things like that who were still logged into those still have access, but people trying to log in now can't. And they were able to disable and disconnect other vital systems to make sure that they weren't affected by the attack, which means that while some of their services and things are down, they are still open for business effectively, it sounds like. Whereas in the British Library, their phone lines, on-site library services, a lot of things were taken down by this cyber attack, to the extent that the article on Bleeping Computer calls out that the British Library's facilities, including reading rooms for personal study, are still operational. So, like, the building itself wasn't affected, but everything else absolutely was.
Yeah, it's a pretty big impact when you're dealing with services that affect the public, right? Especially when it's a place of refuge. So the Wi-Fi systems being down, I guess I was joking a little bit earlier, but I guess we had to fall back on the Dewey Decimal System here to determine where the books are going to go back in the catalog and on what shelf. This isn't the first time we've seen against the public sector in this aspect, although it's kind of an interesting coincidence in the sense that two major public library systems were taken offline in the past week. Albeit, right, when we think about that stuff like the CVSS score, it is published what Black Mamba does as far as their attack life cycle, using a phishing email and then kind of escalating from there through a number of archived macro Office documents, and then ultimately kicking off a series of droppers. Now, it's yes, a number of systems were encrypted from the Toronto Public Library system, but as you mentioned, they're actively working with local officials, along with the British Library is also working along with local officials to try to get things back online for their constituents. They want people back, using these things, and they hope that they can get it figured out here soon.
It raises an interesting point of expanding the idea of what we kind of start to think of as infrastructure, right? Libraries as infrastructure. A lot of groups have specific rules and specific standards that they hold users of their ransomware. A lot of the ransomware as a service groups do, to say like, hey, don't attack hospitals, don't attack vital critical things that keep people alive. And that can extend to some critical infrastructure, right? But thinking not necessarily of libraries necessarily as critical infrastructure, but as infrastructure nonetheless, when you think about the number of people who rely on things like the free internet access, like research and other services that a lot of libraries offer. Like a lot of libraries offer things like job hunting help or resume building help and things like that for people who are trying to get back on their feet. So as a part of society, viewing them as kind of a piece of the infrastructure puzzle, it's something that you don't really think about until you see an entire library system go down and you start thinking about all of the things that will affect in the long run. But we've got a couple minutes here to wrap up, and we have one final story, and I think this is something that we can kind of touch on lightly, but it is an interesting avenue to keep an eye on for anyone who's in cybersecurity and practicing. And potentially wants to make a little extra money, is that Google has expanded their vulnerability reward program, offering over $30,000, or I should say up to some payments over $30,000.
Oh, come on. It's 31337.
Which is 3 elite for anyone keeping track.
It's elite.
Yeah, elite. For potential hazards or bounties for potential hazards and attacks against generative artificial intelligence models.
Yeah. So
And that's
what's happening
joining
here?
OpenAI and Microsoft in their large bounty programs for this.
Oh, sorry to jump on, that delay, but yeah, for those out there that watch our show and you play the bug bounty programs, it's a great opportunity to start looking at vulnerabilities directly in those AI systems, particularly Google's program. Right, they cover things like Google Bard, which is already available in a number of different countries, and also Google Cloud is now rolling out some AI features. The idea is, find those risks that traditional computing doesn't have. They have to include stuff like being able to pose a compelling attack scenario or a feasible path to Google within their internal systems, or even cause a user harm. These are different types of vulnerabilities that they are willing to pay out on. We've seen a number, right, in the past. We talked about them on the show, how to get AI to do things for you, to say inappropriate things, how to poison AI so that it is saying inappropriate or incorrect things, or even we've seen stuff like those hallucinations, right?
Noting on hallucinations, it is important to note that, like, within this bounty program, like getting an AI to hallucinate, right, and just give you false information doesn't count as a vulnerability. But what would count as a vulnerability is the fact that these generative AI models are constantly learning based on what you put into them. And so it's interesting to note that the types of things that they are looking at are prompt injections, right? Can you do some prompt injection? Have you figured out a way to do that? Can you get the AI to leak sensitive internal data from within the training data set, even if it's been told not to tell you exactly what it was trained on? Can you force it to do that? Using model manipulation. And then this other one that's very interesting to me is adversarial perturbation.
Yeah.
Which is, I already knew what this problem was. I just didn't know the term for it. And so it was interesting to go and dive into that a little bit more because I love the topic. But the idea of essentially saying, like, here's a picture of a panda, and getting the AI to be like, yeah, that's a picture of a panda, and then adding digital noise and fuzz to that image such that it still looks like the exact same image to, like, a human, right? A regular person would look at it and say that's still a panda, but you've changed it on a very small, minute scale so that the AI views it and says, this is a picture of a monkey. And then you do that enough across enough data, and suddenly the AI is always identifying pandas as monkeys because it's starting to see overlap between those data sets. So being able to trick the AI into saying that one thing is another thing and make that a permanent model bias inside the AI. That is the type of thing that they are looking for, and that's what those elite payments, those $31,337 payments, are targeted at.
Yeah, this goes to join in, of course, Google's larger vulnerability reward program. It's better known as bug bounties across the entire market, right? So keep in mind that just because the stuff is new and emerging doesn't mean it can't pay well too. Hopefully, we can help plug some of these holes that we're starting to see. I know from a criminal perspective, we're already seeing an advancement in use of generative AI and AI recognition for things like CAPTCHA bypass. We're seeing things like you mentioned the story around manipulative text on a handwritten note, to convince it to do otherwise. And so definitely pushing to see how far we can get with this stuff. But I think that's our I don't know, I'd call it a good feeling for the day is that we realize there's just problems and we want to pay people to fix it.
Going to pay people to fix it. And also Google's bug bounty program compared to Microsoft and OpenAI does have the highest payouts, I'll say. Now those are for extremely critical vulnerabilities, but if you're interested in AI stuff, if you're interested in doing some research on your own and trying to trick these systems, then there could be some payout in it for you. But that brings us to the end of our show. Thank you so much for joining us for GPS Live for November 3rd, 2023. If you have watched this on demand, thank you so much for your time. Go ahead and leave us a comment. Let us know what you thought. And if you have any other topics that you would like us to cover in the future, and we can start diving into those. Until then, I have been and will continue to be Tristan Morris.
And I am Jonathan Singer.
And we will see you all next time.